The morning sun cast long shadows across the memorial garden of New Sol Colony. Thousands of people gathered in silence, their black clothes moving gently in the soft wind. At the center of the crowd stood a simple stone platform where Admiral Dae-hyun Park would be laid to rest. Commander Hyun-woo Kim stood at attention near the platform. His uniform was perfectly pressed, but his eyes showed the sadness he felt inside. Dae-hyun had been more than his commanding officer. The old man had taught him everything about leadership, strategy, and most importantly, how to care for the people under his command. Dr. So-young Lee, Dae-hyun's daughter, stepped forward to speak. Her voice was steady despite her grief. She wore her father's medals on her chest, as was the custom for family members during military funerals. My father believed that peace was not the absence of war, she began. He said peace was the presence of understanding between different peoples. He spent his life building bridges across the stars, bringing together humans and aliens who had never trusted each other before. In the crowd, Captain Ji-hoon Choi listened carefully. He was young, only 25, but he had flown many missions under Dae-hyun's command. The admiral had always said that a good pilot must think with both courage and wisdom. Ji-hoon hoped he could live up to that teaching. Ambassador Tae-min-jung stood with the diplomatic section. Representatives from 12 different alien species had come to honor Dae-hyun. The Zentari had sent their crystal singers. The Makari delegation wore their ceremonial blue robes. Even the usually isolated Threnody had sent someone to pay respects. The memorial garden was beautiful in its simplicity. White stone paths wound between flowering trees that had been brought from Earth. Small monuments honored humans who had died in service to the colony. Each stone told a story of sacrifice and honor. As So-young continued speaking about her father's peaceful missions, the colony's defense sensors began picking up something unusual. Deep in the communications center, warning lights started flashing. Lieutenant Yoon-hee Park, no relation to the admiral, stared at her screen in confusion. "Sir," she called to her supervisor, "I'm getting readings of multiple ships approaching our system. They're not broadcasting any identification codes." The supervisor, Major Won-shik Han, frowned as he looked at the data. "How many ships?" "At least 40, sir. Maybe more. They're moving fast and in military formation." Won-shik felt his stomach drop. Today was supposed to be a day of peace and remembrance. The entire colony had gathered for the funeral. Most of their military forces were attending the ceremony instead of being at their posts. Back in the memorial garden, So-young was reaching the most important part of her speech. Admiral Park taught us that strength comes not from weapons or fear, but from the bonds we build with others. He showed us that even former enemies can become friends if we take time to understand them. The crowd murmured in agreement. Many of them remembered the Kalari Wars, when Dae-hyun had convinced the fierce Kalari warriors to join the human alliance instead of fighting against it. He had done it not through force, but by learning about their culture and showing them respect. Suddenly, a young officer ran up to Commander Hyun-woo. The man was breathing hard and his face was pale with worry. "Sir," he whispered urgently, "we have incoming ships, unknown fleet approaching fast. Major Han requests your immediate presence in the command center." Hyun-woo felt his blood turn cold. He looked around at the thousands of people gathered peacefully in the garden. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Elderly veterans shared memories of serving with Dae-hyun. Alien diplomats stood respectfully among the human mourners. "How long do we have?" Hyun-woo asked quietly. "Maybe 20 minutes, sir. 20 minutes. Not enough time to evacuate everyone. Not enough time to prepare proper defenses." The irony was bitter. On a day meant to honor peace, war was coming to find them. Hyun-woo made a quick decision. He could not interrupt the funeral with panic. Instead, he sent quiet messages to key military personnel scattered throughout the crowd. Captain Ji-hoon received a message on his communicator and immediately understood. He began moving toward the spaceport where his fighter squadron was stationed. Dr. So-young continued her speech, unaware of the approaching danger. "My father always said that our ceremonies and traditions are not signs of weakness. They are proof of our humanity. They show that we remember those who came before us and honor their sacrifice." The alien delegates nodded in understanding. Many of their species had similar customs for honoring the dead. The Mokari believed that proper funeral rites ensured the spirit could find peace. The Zentari sang crystal songs that could be heard across vast distances, calling their ancestors home. Ambassador Taemin noticed some military personnel quietly leaving the ceremony. His diplomatic training made him sensitive to unusual activities. He activated his own communicator and quickly learned about the approaching threat. In space, the unknown fleet continued its approach. The ships were long and angular, painted in dark colors that absorbed light. They moved with military precision, showing no signs of peaceful intent. On the lead ship, War Chief Kethvor of the Veltar Empire studied images of the human colony. His species had been watching human expansion for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Today seemed perfect. The humans were gathered in large groups, distracted by their sentimental ceremony. The humans waste time on useless rituals, Kethvor told his officers. While they weep over their dead, we will show them the true meaning of strength. The Veltar had built their empire through conquest and fear. They believed that only power mattered in the universe. To them, humans seemed weak because they spent time on art, culture, and ceremonies instead of focusing purely on military might. Begin the attack as soon as we reach weapons range, Kethvor ordered. Target their gathering first, a species that cries over corpses will surrender quickly when faced with real warriors. Back on New Sol Colony, Commander Hyunwoo reached the command center. The situation was worse than he had feared. The approaching fleet was massive and well-armed. Worse, they showed no interest in communication or negotiation. Have they responded to any of our hails? He asked. Nothing, sir, replied Major Han. They're maintaining radio silence and approaching in attack formation. Hyunwoo studied the tactical display. His own forces were scattered across the colony, attending the funeral. It would take time to get everyone to their battle stations. Time they did not have. He opened a communication channel to all military personnel. This is Commander Kim. We have hostile ships approaching. All personnel report to stations immediately. Priority 1 is protecting the civilians at the memorial ceremony. In the memorial garden, So Young was finishing her speech. Today we lay Admiral Park to rest, but his legacy of peace and understanding will live on in all of us. He taught us that true strength comes from protecting those we love and building bridges with those who are different from us. The crowd began to applaud softly, showing their respect for both the Admiral and his daughter's words. But their peaceful moment was about to end. High above, the first Veltar ships entered weapons range. Kethvor smiled coldly as he looked down at the gathered humans. Fire, he commanded. The attack began just as the funeral procession started moving toward the burial site. Plasma beams struck the edges of the memorial garden, sending dirt and debris flying through the air. People screamed and ran in all directions, as more shots rained down from the sky. Commander Hyunwoo's worst fears had come true. The enemy had chosen to attack during their most sacred moment, when they were honoring their beloved dead. But they had made one critical mistake. They had no idea what humans were capable of when someone threatened their family. The plasma beams lit up the morning sky like deadly fireworks. The first shots hit the outer edges of the memorial garden, turning peaceful flower beds into smoking craters. But instead of panicking, something remarkable happened. Commander Hyunwoo's voice cut through the noise and confusion like a blade. "Memorial Formation 7!" he shouted. "Protect the civilians! Military personnel execute Protocol 9!" The words seemed like magic. Suddenly, the scattered crowd moved with purpose. Veterans, who had been sitting quietly moments before, jumped into action. Active military personnel who had been mourning their admiral transformed into a coordinated defense force. Dr. So Young grabbed the microphone that had been used for the funeral speech. All civilians move to the underground shelters. Follow the blue emergency lights. Medical personnel set up triage stations at points 3 and 7. The crowd moved like water flowing downhill. There was no pushing or shoving. Children were lifted by adults. Elderly people were helped by younger ones. The alien delegates were guided to safety by human diplomats who knew the colony's layout. Captain Ji-hoon ran toward the spaceport, dodging falling debris. His fighter squadron was already preparing for launch. Pilot Min Ho-yu was doing pre-flight checks at record speed. "How long until we can get airborne?" Ji-hoon asked as he jumped into his cockpit. 2 minutes for the first wave, 4 for the full squadron, Minho replied. His hands moved over the controls with practiced ease. Above them, the Veltar ships continued their bombardment. War Chief Kethfor watched the destruction with satisfaction. But something bothered him. The humans were not running around in panic, like he expected. Instead, they seemed to be following some kind of plan. Report from ground scanners, his tactical officer called out. The humans are moving in organized patterns. It looks like they have emergency procedures in place. Kethfor frowned. Impossible. Our intelligence said they would be emotionally compromised by their funeral ceremony. Continue the attack. Deploy ground forces to the main population center. The Veltar had studied human psychology for months. They believed that attacking during an emotional moment like a funeral would break human morale. They expected confusion, fear, and quick surrender. They could not have been more wrong. In the memorial garden, Commander Hyunwoo turned the funeral gathering into a fortress. The monuments and ceremonial structures that honored dead heroes became defensive positions. Veterans took cover behind the stone memorials, setting up weapons with deadly efficiency. The garden's design worked perfectly for defense. Admiral Dae-hyun had insisted that it be built with clear sight lines and multiple levels. He said it would help people feel connected to their history. Now, those same design features gave defenders excellent fields of fire. Ambassador Tae-min coordinated with the alien delegates. Your people need to reach the diplomatic shelter, he told the Zentari representative. Can your crystal singers create a sound barrier to confuse their targeting systems? The Zentari, a tall being with crystalline skin, nodded. We can create harmonic disruption. It will interfere with their sensors for a short time. Do it, Tae-min said. The Zentari began singing in their strange, beautiful language. The sound made the air itself seem to vibrate. Immediately, the accuracy of the Veltar bombardment decreased as their targeting computers struggled with the sonic interference. Dr. So-young led the civilian evacuation while simultaneously working her portable computer. As a xenobiologist, she understood alien technology better than most people. She was trying to analyze the attack patterns and figure out what species they were facing. These weapon signatures, she muttered to herself. I've seen them before in the database. Veltar Empire, militaristic culture. They use plasma-based weapons and prefer direct assault tactics. She quickly sent this information to Commander Hyunwoo. Knowing your enemy was the first step in defeating them. The first wave of Ji-hoon's fighters launched into the sky just as Veltar ground troops began landing. The enemy soldiers came down in drop pods that hit the colony's outskirts. Like metal meteors. Ji-hoon's fighters screamed through the atmosphere, his weapons locked onto the largest Veltar ship. This is Phoenix Leader, he called over the radio, beginning attack run on enemy command vessel. But the Veltar were not sitting idle. Their fighter escorts moved to intercept the human pilots. The sky above New Sol Colony turned into a deadly dance of ships, trying to destroy each other. On the ground, the first Veltar soldiers emerged from their drop pods. They were tall and lean, with dark armor that covered their pale skin. They carried energy weapons and moved with military precision. But they found themselves facing something unexpected. The humans were not running away. Instead, they had turned their peaceful colony into a war zone that favored defenders. Sergeant Kyu-min Lee had been attending the funeral in his dress uniform. Now he crouched behind Admiral Dae-hyun's memorial stone, his rifle aimed at the approaching enemy soldiers. Around him, other veterans and active military personnel had taken similar positions. Remember your training, he called to the younger soldiers. They want to take our home. They interrupted our farewell to the Admiral. Show them what humans do to those who disrespect our dead. The Veltar soldiers advanced confidently at first. Their intelligence had told them that humans were weak during emotional moments. They expected to find frightened civilians hiding in their homes. Instead, they found themselves walking into a carefully planned ambush. The memorial garden had been built on raised ground that overlooked the main approaches to the colony. The paths between monuments created natural choke points where small groups of defenders could stop larger enemy forces. When the Veltar reached the outer edge of the garden, they discovered that the humans had turned funeral decorations into weapons. Ceremonial poles became improvised spears, memorial wreaths hid explosive devices. Even the flowers had been arranged to mark the best defensive positions. Lieutenant Nari Song coordinated the defense from a position near the main monument. She had served under Admiral Dae Hyun for 3 years and knew exactly what he would have done in this situation. "Let them come closer," she whispered into her communicator. "Wait until they're committed to the approach, then hit them from all sides." The Veltar soldiers walked into the trap like they were following a script. Their training focused on overwhelming enemies with superior firepower and numbers. They had never faced humans who fought with both military skill and emotional fury. When Nari gave the signal, the memorial garden exploded into action. Human defenders rose from behind every monument, every decorative wall, every ceremonial structure. Their weapons fire caught the Veltar completely by surprise. But the aliens were not helpless. They quickly adapted to the situation and began using their own advanced tactics. Their energy weapons could punch through the stone monuments that the humans used for cover. War Chief Kethavor watched the battle from his ship with growing confusion. His ground forces should have overwhelmed the human settlement within minutes. Instead, they were locked in serious combat with opponents who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. "How are they fighting so well?" he demanded. "Our intelligence said they would be disorganized and emotional." His tactical officer studied the battle reports. "Sir, it appears the humans have turned their funeral ceremony into a military operation. They're using the memorial site as a fortress." Kethavor could not understand it. In Veltar culture, ceremonies for the dead were purely symbolic. They did not serve any practical military purpose. The idea that humans could transform a funeral into a defensive position seemed impossible. "Send more ground troops," he ordered. "Increase the bombardment. These humans will learn that sentiment is no match for superior firepower." But down on the planet's surface, the humans were teaching the Veltar a different lesson. They were showing that fighting for something you love makes you stronger, not weaker. Dr. So-Young finished evacuating the last group of civilians and hurried to help with the wounded. As she worked, she continued analyzing the enemy communications that her equipment was intercepting. Something in the Veltar radio chatter caught her attention. She heard words that seemed familiar, even though she did not speak their language. References to honor, duty, and something that sounded like ancestor worship. "That's interesting," she said to herself. "These aliens talk about honoring their dead too. I wonder if they understand what they've really done here." The battle raged across New Sol Colony as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Smoke rose from damaged buildings, but the human defenders held their ground with determination that surprised everyone, including themselves. Commander Hyun Woo moved through the memorial garden like Admiral Dae Hyun himself had returned to life. He seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating defenses, encouraging soldiers, and making tactical decisions with calm precision. "Second squad, move to the monument of the fallen pilots," he called over his communicator. "Use the ceremonial walls for cover. Third squad, fall back to the diplomat's memorial. Create overlapping fields of fire." The garden's layout worked perfectly for defense. Every monument, every decorative wall, every ceremonial arch had been placed with care and thought. Now those peaceful structures became the backbone of a military defense that the Veltar could not break. Captain Ji-hoon's fighters screamed through the sky above, engaged in deadly combat with Veltar interceptors. The enemy pilots were skilled, but they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated human creativity in combat. "Phoenix 2, follow my lead," Ji-hoon called to his wingman. "We're going to try something they won't expect." Instead of using standard attack patterns, Ji-hoon led his squadron in a formation that mimicked the funeral procession they had been watching earlier. The planes moved in the same ceremonial pattern that had been planned for Admiral Dae Hyun's burial march. The Veltar pilots had never seen anything like it. The human fighters moved in perfect formation, but their pattern seemed to serve no military purpose. It confused the alien targeting computers and made it harder for them to predict human movements. "What kind of formation is that?" "The Veltar," squadron leader asked his pilots. "It makes no tactical sense, but it worked." The human fighters used the unexpected pattern to get closer to the enemy ships before launching their attacks. 3 Veltar interceptors were destroyed before their pilots understood what was happening. On the ground, Dr. So-Young continued her work with the wounded while monitoring alien communications. Her portable equipment picked up more and more interesting information from the enemy radio chatter. "Commander Kim," she called over her communicator, "I'm getting some very interesting intelligence. The Veltar are talking about something called ancestor duty and warrior honor codes. I think they have their own funeral traditions." Hyun-woo was too busy directing the defense to fully process this information, but he filed it away in his mind. In his experience, understanding your enemy was often more important than having better weapons. The Veltar ground forces pressed their attack with increasing frustration. What should have been a simple conquest was turning into a real war. The human defenders fought with a coordination and fury that their intelligence reports had not predicted. Sergeant Q-Min Lee led a group of veterans in a counterattack against a Veltar position near the colony's water treatment plant. These men and women had served with Admiral Dae-hyun in past conflicts. They knew how to work together without needing detailed orders. The Admiral always said that protecting civilians is a soldier's highest duty, Q-Min told his squad as they prepared to advance. Today we fight not just for the colony, but for his memory. The veterans moved like ghosts through the colony's streets. They used knowledge of the local terrain that no outsider could match. Every shortcut, every hidden passage, every useful piece of cover was known to them. The Veltar found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to appear and disappear at will. Human soldiers would attack from one direction, then vanish before the aliens could respond effectively. Lieutenant Nari Song coordinated the Memorial Garden's defenses with skill that would have made her former commander proud. She had learned military tactics from Admiral Dae-hyun, but more importantly, she had learned his philosophy about fighting for something greater than yourself. "Hold the line at the eternal flame," she ordered her troops. "That flame has burned for every human who died defending this colony. It will not go out today." The eternal flame was a simple memorial that burned continuously at the center of the garden. It represented the sacrifice of all those who had given their lives for peace and freedom. Now it became a symbol of resistance against those who would destroy that peace. War Chief Kethvor watched the battle reports with growing anger and confusion. His forces had numerical superiority, better weapons, and the advantage of surprise. Yet the humans continued to resist with effectiveness that bordered on the impossible. "Tactical analysis," he demanded from his officers. "How are they fighting?" "So well." His intelligence officer studied the data streaming in from the battle. "Sir, it appears the humans have turned their entire memorial ceremony into a military operation. They're using funeral formations as combat tactics. Their defensive positions are based on the layout of their burial ground." Kethvor could not understand it. That makes no sense. Funeral ceremonies are for mourning the dead, not for fighting wars. But that was exactly where the Veltar were wrong. They saw human funeral traditions as signs of weakness and sentimentality. They did not understand that these ceremonies actually strengthened human bonds and reminded them what they were fighting to protect. Dr. So-Young made a breakthrough in her analysis of the enemy communications. Her xenobiology training helped her recognize patterns in the alien language that others might have missed. "Commander Kim," she called urgently, "I need to speak with you immediately. I've discovered something important about our attackers." Hyun-woo found a moment between coordinating defensive actions to listen to So-Young's report. What she told him changed everything he thought he knew about the battle. "The Veltar have extensive funeral traditions of their own," she explained quickly. "They talk constantly about honoring fallen warriors, maintaining ancestor shrines, and performing warriors' last march ceremonies. Their entire military culture is built around venerating their dead." Hyun-woo stared at her in amazement. "You mean they attacked us during a funeral? But they have the same kind of traditions themselves?" "Exactly. And from what I can tell, their ceremonies are even more elaborate than ours. They spend enormous resources on honoring their fallen warriors." The irony was staggering. The Veltar had chosen to attack during a human funeral because they believed it showed human weakness, but their own society was built on the foundation of honoring the dead. Captain Ji-hoon's squadron had managed to damage several Veltar ships, but the enemy still had numerical superiority in space. However, his pilots were adapting to the enemy's tactics faster than the Veltar could adapt to theirs. "Phoenix leader to all fighters," he broadcast. The enemy expects us to follow standard combat patterns. Instead, we're going to use formations that honor our fallen pilots. Every maneuver we make will carry the memory of those who came before us. It sounded like poetry, but it was actually brilliant tactics. By using ceremonial flight patterns as combat formations, the human pilots created strategies that no enemy database could predict or counter. The Veltar pilots found themselves constantly surprised by human movements that seemed to follow some kind of ritualistic logic instead of standard military doctrine. On the ground, the battle had reached a stalemate. The Veltar could not break through the human defenses, but the humans could not drive off the invasion force either. However, something was changing in the nature of the fight. Ambassador Tai Min had been monitoring both human and alien communications throughout the battle. His diplomatic training made him sensitive to changes in tone and language. He noticed that some Veltar radio transmissions were beginning to sound uncertain. "Commander Kim," he reported, "I think the enemy is starting to have doubts about this attack. Some of their communications suggest confusion about human behavior." That made sense to Hyun Woo. The Veltar had expected an easy victory over emotionally compromised humans. Instead, they found themselves in a difficult fight against opponents who seemed to gain strength from their emotional connections. Dr. So Young continued analyzing the cultural information she was gathering. The more she learned about Veltar funeral traditions, the more she understood how profound their mistake had been. "They have something called the Sacred March of Ancestors," she reported. "It's a ceremony where entire fleets stop their military operations to honor fallen comrades. The whole Veltar Empire observes these events." Hyun Woo began to see possibilities beyond simple military victory. If the Veltar valued their own funeral traditions so highly, perhaps they could be made to understand what they had done to the humans. "Keep monitoring their communications," he told So Young. "I want to know everything about their cultural practices. We might be able to use this information in ways they never expect." The battle continued, but now it had a different character. The humans were no longer just defending their colony. They were defending their right to honor their dead with dignity and respect. And somewhere in the Veltar fleet, doubts were beginning to grow about the wisdom of attacking people who shared their most sacred values. Dr. So Young worked furiously at her computer station while the sounds of battle echoed around the colony. Her xenobiology training had taught her to look for patterns in alien behavior, and what she was discovering about the Veltar amazed her. "Commander Kim," she called over the communicator, "you need to hear this. I've broken into their cultural database, and what I'm finding changes everything." Commander Hyun Woo ducked behind a memorial wall as plasma fire scorched the air above his head. "Can it wait? We're a little busy right now." "This is exactly why we can't wait," So Young insisted. "The Veltar have funeral ceremonies that make ours look simple. They call them Warrior's Last March rituals. When a Veltar commander dies, the entire fleet stops fighting and performs elaborate honor ceremonies that can last for days." Even in the middle of combat, Hyunwoo understood the importance of this information. "Are you saying they're more sentimental about their dead than we are?" "Much more. They have entire military units whose only job is to perform funeral rites. They built monuments to fallen warriors on every planet they control. Their whole society revolves around honoring those who died in battle." Ambassador Taemin had been listening to the conversation while helping coordinate the alien delegates' safety. His diplomatic mind immediately grasped the implications. "Commander," he said urgently, "if that's true, then they attacked us during our funeral not because they despise such ceremonies, but because they don't understand that we have them too." Captain Ji-hoon's voice crackled over the radio from his fighter. "Phoenix leader to ground control. I've got a wounded Veltar pilot here. His ship is down, but he ejected safely. Should I capture him for interrogation?" "Bring him in," Hyun Woo ordered. "But treat him according to military protocol. No abuse, no torture. We're better than that." 20 minutes later, Ji-hoon escorted a captured Veltar officer into the command bunker. The alien was tall and lean, with pale blue skin and dark eyes. His armor was damaged but still functional. Most importantly, he seemed calm rather than afraid. "I am Sub-Commander Jethnal of the Veltar Third Fleet," the prisoner announced in heavily accented but understandable human language. "I demand to be treated according to the Warrior's Code." Dr. So Young looked up from her computer with interest. "The Warrior's Code? What does that involve?" Jethnal seemed surprised by the question. You do not know of the Warrior's Code. It governs how captured fighters must be treated. They must be given food, medical care, and the right to perform honor rituals for their fallen comrades. Ambassador Taemin stepped forward. We'll certainly provide food and medical care. Tell us about these honor rituals. The Veltar officer looked confused. You truly do not know? Every civilized species honors their military dead. It is the most basic requirement of warrior culture. We do honor our dead, Hyun-woo said carefully. In fact, you attacked us in the middle of a funeral ceremony for one of our greatest military leaders. The change in Jethnal's expression was dramatic. His dark eyes widened, and his pale skin became even paler. You were performing funeral rites? For a military commander? Admiral Dae-hyun Park, So-young said. He died peacefully after a long career of building peace between different species. We were laying him to rest when your fleet attacked. Jethnal sat down heavily in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We interrupted a funeral? For a military leader? But that is... He struggled to find words. That is forbidden by every law of honorable warfare. Dr. So-young leaned forward. Tell us about your own funeral traditions. What Jethnal described over the next hour shocked the humans. Veltar funeral ceremonies were incredibly elaborate affairs that could involve entire star systems. When a high-ranking commander died, the whole empire would observe periods of mourning. Military operations would stop completely while funeral fleets carried the dead warrior's body to sacred burial grounds. The warrior's last march is our most sacred ceremony, Jethnal explained. No Veltar would ever attack an enemy during such a ritual. It would be the worst kind of dishonor. Ambassador Taemin asked the crucial question. Then why did your fleet attack us during our funeral? Because we did not know, Jethnal said miserably. Our intelligence report said that humans were weak because they wasted time on sentimental ceremonies. We thought your funeral was a sign of weakness, not a sacred ritual. The irony was staggering. The Veltar had attacked during a human funeral precisely because they misunderstood what funerals meant. They thought human ceremonies showed weakness, when in their own culture, such ceremonies were the most sacred and important events possible. Captain Ji-hoon had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement. So your people respect funeral rites even more than we do? Much more, Jethnal admitted. A Veltar warrior who interrupted funeral ceremonies would be cast out from the military and stripped of all honor. It is unthinkable. Commander Hyun-woo began to see possibilities that went far beyond winning the current battle. If the Veltar valued funeral traditions so highly, they might be willing to listen to reason once they understood what they had done. Sub-Commander Jethnal, he said formally, would you be willing to communicate with your fleet? To explain what really happened here today? The Veltar officer looked uncertain. I am a prisoner of war. The Warrior's Code allows me to refuse to cooperate with enemy military operations. This isn't about military operations, Dr. So-young said gently. It's about preventing a terrible misunderstanding from getting worse. Your people attacked us because they didn't understand our traditions. Now that you know the truth, don't you have a duty to inform them? Jethnal considered this carefully. In Veltar culture, preventing dishonor was even more important than following orders. If his fleet was committing a grave violation of the Warrior's Code, he had an obligation to stop it. I will speak to War Chief Kethvor, he decided. But I cannot promise he will listen. The battle has already begun. Veltar pride does not allow for easy retreat. We're not asking for retreat, Ambassador Taemin said. We're asking for understanding. Meanwhile, the battle outside continued. But something was changing in the Veltar forces. Some of their communications were becoming uncertain. Dr. So-young's continued monitoring of their radio chatter revealed growing confusion among the alien troops. Lieutenant Nari Song reported from the Memorial Garden. The enemy ground forces seem less aggressive than before. They're not pressing their attacks as hard as they were an hour ago. Captain Ji-hoon's pilots were noticing the same thing in space combat. Phoenix leader to ground control, he reported. The Veltar fighters are still engaging us, but their tactics seem more defensive now, like they're not sure they want to be here. War Chief Kethvor was indeed having doubts, though he would not admit them to his officers. The human resistance was far stronger than expected, but that was not what bothered him most. His warriors were reporting strange things about human behavior that did not match their intelligence reports. "The humans fight with honor," one ground commander reported. "They do not torture prisoners or attack wounded enemies. They even provide medical care to our injured soldiers. They fight to protect their ceremonial grounds with great determination," another officer added. "It is as if they consider their burial site to be sacred ground." These reports troubled Kethvor more than he cared to admit. The Veltar had justified their attack by claiming that humans were weak and dishonorable, but the evidence suggested otherwise. When Sub-Commander Jethnal's communication request came through, Kethvor almost refused to listen. Speaking with captured officers was often pointless, but something in Jethnal's voice made him reconsider. "War Chief," Jethnal said, "carefully, I must inform you of a serious situation. The humans were performing funeral rites when we attacked. We interrupted a sacred ceremony for their military dead." The silence that followed lasted for nearly a minute. When Kethvor finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Explain." Jethnal described everything he had learned about the human funeral ceremony. He explained that Admiral Dae-hyun Park had been a respected military leader who died of natural causes. He told of the thousands of mourners who had gathered to honor a man who spent his life building peace. "The humans have funeral traditions similar to our own," Jethnal concluded. "We attacked them during their equivalent of a warrior's last march ceremony." War Chief Kethvor felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. For the first time in his life, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. War Chief Kethvor stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring down at the human colony below. For the first time in his 30-year military career, he felt uncertain about an attack. Sub-Commander Jethnal's report had shaken him more than any battle he had ever fought. "Sir," his tactical officer said hesitantly, "ground forces are requesting permission to intensify the bombardment. They say human resistance is stronger than expected." Kethvor did not answer immediately. Instead, he thought about the warrior's last march ceremony he had attended just 2 months ago. When Fleet Commander Morgeth had died in a training accident, the entire Third Fleet had stopped all operations for 5 days. They had sung the ancient songs, told stories of the commander's victories, and carried his body to the sacred burial grounds of Veltar Prime. During those 5 days, no Veltar warrior would have considered attacking an enemy. Even their most hated foes would have been safe from assault while the funeral rites were performed. It was not just tradition. It was the foundation of everything that made them honorable warriors. Commander Hyanwoo made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of pressing his military advantage, he ordered a temporary ceasefire and opened a direct communication channel to the Veltar flagship. "This is Commander Hyunwoo Kim of New Seoul Colony," he broadcast. "I wish to speak directly with War Chief Kethvor." On the Veltar bridge, officers looked at each other in confusion. The humans were in a defensive position. They had no reason to offer communication unless they wanted to surrender. "Put him through," Kethvor ordered after a moment's hesitation. Hyunwoo's face appeared on the main view screen. He looked tired and his uniform was dusty from battle, but his eyes were clear and determined. "War Chief Kethvor," Hyunwoo began, "I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding. Your sub-commander Jethnal has learned something important about today's events. Before this conflict goes any further, I think you should know what we've discovered about your people." Kethvor felt his stomach tighten. "What have you discovered?" "Dr. So-Young Lee, please step forward," Hyunwoo said. So-Young moved into view of the camera. Her formal funeral dress was torn and dirty, but she carried herself with dignity. In her hands, she held a datapad filled with information about Veltar culture. "War Chief," she began, "we've learned about your warriors' last march ceremonies. We know about your sacred burial grounds on Veltar Prime. We understand that your entire military culture is built on honoring those who died in service to your people." Kethvor's eyes widened. How could humans know about sacred Veltar traditions that were kept secret from most other species? So-Young continued. We know about the Monument of Fallen Blades, where you honor warriors who died in single combat. We know about the Song of Departed Spirits that you sing when a fleet commander passes away. We know about the 7-day mourning period that follows the death of any Veltar military leader. Each piece of information hit Kethvor like a physical blow. These were not just military secrets. They were the most sacred aspects of Veltar culture. The fact that humans had discovered and understood them showed a level of respect and intelligence that their attack had never considered. "How do you know these things?" Kethvor asked quietly. "Because we recognize them," Hyunwoo said. "Your funeral traditions are different from ours in their details, but they serve the same purpose. They honor those who gave their lives for something greater than themselves. They remind the living what they're fighting to protect." Ambassador Tae-min stepped into view. "War Chief, we intercepted your communications during the battle. Your officers spoke of duty to ancestors, warrior honor codes, and respect for the fallen. These are not the words of a species that despises funeral traditions. These are the words of people who understand what such ceremonies really mean." Kethvor felt the deck seem to shift beneath his feet. The entire justification for this attack had been based on the belief that humans were weak because they wasted time on sentimental rituals. But if humans shared the same values that formed the foundation of Veltar society— "You attacked us during a funeral," So-young said gently. "But your own culture teaches that funeral ceremonies are the most sacred events in a warrior's life. What would your ancestors think of warriors who interrupted the funeral rites of an honored enemy commander?" The question struck Kethvor like lightning. In Veltar tradition, the opinions of ancestors were more important than the orders of living commanders. If the spirits of dead warriors disapproved of an action, no living Veltar could consider it honorable. On the bridge around him, Kethvor could see his officers exchanging uncertain glances. They had all heard Sub-Commander Jethnal's report. They knew that the humans had been performing funeral rites when the attack began. Captain Ji-hoon's voice came over the communication channel. "War Chief, I have your Sub-Commander Jethnal. Here, he has seen our memorial garden and our funeral traditions firsthand. Perhaps you should hear his report directly." Jethnal appeared on screen, still clearly a prisoner but treated with obvious respect. "War Chief," he said formally, "I must report that the humans honor their military dead with ceremonies that rival our own. Their memorial garden contains monuments to warriors who died in service to their people. Their funeral rites show the same respect for fallen leaders that we show in our warriors' last march." He paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. "Sir, I have observed their treatment of prisoners and wounded enemies. They follow honor codes similar to our own. These are not the weak, dishonorable beings described in our intelligence reports." War Chief Kethvor closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he saw the tactical display showing the ongoing battle. His forces were still engaged with human defenders who fought to protect their sacred burial ground, just like Veltar warriors would fight to protect their own sacred sites. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving reports from ground commanders. Several units are requesting clarification of mission objectives. Some officers are expressing concern about fighting during what appears to be a funeral ceremony." The doubt was spreading through his forces. Veltar warriors were trained from childhood to respect funeral rites above all other considerations. Learning that they had violated this most sacred principle was causing discipline problems throughout the fleet. Commander Hyunwoo spoke again from the screen. "War Chief, we're not asking you to surrender or retreat. We're asking you to understand what really happened here today. Your intelligence was wrong about human nature. We're not weak because we honor our dead. We're strong because of it." "Just as you are strong because you honor yours," Dr. So-young added. Ambassador Tae-min leaned forward. "War Chief Kethvor, in your own language, what is the worst insult that can be given to a warrior?" Kethvor answered automatically. "To be called dishonorer of the fallen." "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means a warrior who shows disrespect to funeral ceremonies or burial sites," Kethvor said, then stopped as he realized what he had just admitted. "War Chief," Hyunwoo said gently, "we're not your enemies. We're people who share your most sacred values. The question is, what happens now?" Around the bridge, Veltar officers waited for their commander's decision. They were all thinking about the implications of what they had learned. They were remembering their own funeral ceremonies, their own traditions of honoring the dead. They were wondering what their ancestors would think of warriors who attacked during a funeral. War Chief Kethvor looked down at the human colony, where the battle was still raging around a memorial garden built to honor the dead. For the first time in his career, he wondered if he was fighting on the wrong side. "Ceasefire," he ordered quietly. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked in confusion. "I said ceasefire. All units, ceasefire immediately. We need to think about what we're really doing here." The order went out across the Veltar fleet. Slowly, the sounds of battle began to fade as both sides stopped shooting and tried to understand what was happening. In the sudden quiet, War Chief Kethvor realized that this was no longer just a military operation. It had become something much more complicated and much more important. The silence that followed the ceasefire was strange and heavy. After hours of weapons fire and explosions, the sudden quiet seemed almost unnatural. Across New Sol Colony, both human and Veltar forces waited uncertainly for what would happen. Next, War Chief Kethvor stared at the tactical display showing his fleet positions around the human world. For 30 years, he had made military decisions based on strength, tactics, and the will to dominate enemies. Today, for the first time, he found himself considering whether his enemies might actually be right. "Sir," his communications officer said hesitantly, "the human commander is requesting permission to meet with you in person." "Where?" Kethvor asked. "In their memorial garden, sir. At the site where their funeral ceremony was taking place when we attacked." Several Veltar officers shifted uncomfortably. Meeting in the place where they had committed such a serious violation of honor seemed dangerous. But Kethvor understood the symbolic importance of the location. "Prepare a shuttle," he ordered. "I will meet with them." "Sir, is that wise?" his tactical officer asked. "It could be a trap." Kethvor looked around at his bridge crew. These were honorable warriors who had served with distinction in many campaigns. But today they looked uncertain and troubled. "If they wanted to trap us, they would not have revealed their knowledge of our funeral traditions," he said. "They could have used that information as a weapon. Instead, they used it to show us the truth about what we've done." An hour later, War Chief Kethvor walked through the damaged memorial garden of New Sol Colony. Commander Hyunwoo and his senior officers waited near Admiral Daehyun Park's grave, which had somehow survived the bombardment intact. Dr. So-young stood beside her father's final resting place, still wearing her torn funeral dress. Captain Ji-hoon and Ambassador Tae-min flanked her, their expressions serious but not hostile. "War Chief," Hyunwoo said formally, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Kethvor looked around at the memorial garden with new eyes. Now that he understood what it represented, he could see the careful thought that had gone into its design. Each monument told a story of sacrifice and service. The paths between memorials created natural gathering places where people could come to remember their dead. It was not so different from the sacred burial grounds on Veltar Prime. "Commander Kim," Kethvor said slowly, "I owe you an explanation and an apology." "The explanation would be welcome," Hyunwoo replied. "The apology, that depends on what happens next." Kethvor walked to Admiral Daehyun's grave and read the simple inscription carved into the stone. It spoke of a leader who had brought peace between former enemies and died surrounded by those he loved. "Our intelligence about humans was incomplete," Kethvor began. "We were told that your species was weak because you waste time on emotional ceremonies instead of focusing purely on military strength. We believed that attacking during your funeral would break your morale and lead to quick surrender." Dr. So-young stepped forward. "What your intelligence didn't understand is that our ceremonies don't make us weak. They remind us what we're fighting to protect." "Yes," Kethvor said quietly. "I see that now. Your memorial garden is not a sign of weakness. It is a fortress of memory and purpose." Ambassador Tae-min spoke carefully. "War Chief, we've learned that your own culture has extensive funeral traditions. How did your people come to misunderstand ours so completely?" Kethvor considered the question. "We studied your military capabilities, your technology, your economic systems. but we never studied your culture or your values. We assumed that any species different from us must be inferior to us. That was your mistake, Captain Ji-hoon said. You saw our differences but missed our similarities. The war chief nodded slowly. In Veltar tradition, interrupting funeral ceremonies is the worst violation of honor possible. A warrior who does such a thing is stripped of rank and exiled from society. Yet that is exactly what we have done here today. He turned to face the assembled humans. I cannot undo what has been done. Blood has been spilled on both sides, but I can ensure that it ends here. What are you proposing? Hyunwoo asked. First, immediate withdrawal of all Veltar forces from this system. Second, full medical assistance for wounded humans and compensation for damage to your colony. Third, Kethvor paused, struggling, with words in the human language. Third, proper honor ceremonies for all who died in today's fighting, both human and Veltar. The humans exchanged glances. They had expected demands for surrender or negotiations for territory. They had not expected an offer of honor ceremonies. Dr. So-young asked, what would these ceremonies involve? In Veltar tradition, warriors who die in honorable combat are entitled to full military honors, regardless of which side they fought for, Kethvor explained. If you permit it, my forces would like to perform our warriors' farewell for your fallen defenders. The irony was profound. The Veltar had attacked during a human funeral, but now they wanted to honor the humans who had died defending against that attack. And what about your own fallen? Ambassador Taemin asked. We would hope that you might allow us to retrieve their bodies for proper burial on Veltar Prime, Kethvor said. But we understand if you refuse this request. Commander. Hyunwoo looked at his companions, then at the Veltar war chief. We will not refuse. Your dead fought with honor, even if their cause was based on misunderstanding. They deserve proper burial according to their own traditions. Something shifted in Kethvor's expression. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked genuinely surprised. You would honor our dead after we attacked you during your funeral ceremony? Admiral Dae-hyun taught us that understanding must begin somewhere, So-young said. Today has shown us that your people are not our enemies. You are fellow warriors who made an honest mistake based on incomplete information. Captain Ji-hoon stepped forward. War Chief, I have a proposal. Sub-Commander Jethanal observed our funeral traditions while he was our prisoner. Perhaps some of your officers would like to participate in completing Admiral Dae-hyun's burial ceremony. And perhaps some of our people could observe your warriors' farewell rituals. Kethvor stared at the young human pilot. You would invite us to complete the funeral we interrupted? It seems appropriate, Hyunwoo said. This whole conflict began because we misunderstood each other. Perhaps it should end with us learning to understand each other properly. Over the next 3 hours, an extraordinary thing happened in the Memorial Garden of New Seoul Colony. Human and Veltar forces worked together to complete Admiral Dae-hyun's burial ceremony according to human traditions. Then, in the same garden, they performed Veltar funeral rites for all who had died in the day's fighting. War Chief. Kethvor personally carried one corner of Admiral Dae-hyun's casket to its final resting place. Dr. So-young learned the Veltar Song of Departed Spirits and sang it in memory of fallen alien warriors. Captain Ji-hoon stood honor guard beside Sub-Commander Jethanal as they watched over the bodies of both human and Veltar dead. Ambassador Taemin recorded everything, knowing that this day would be remembered by both species for generations to come. As the sun set over New Seoul Colony, the Memorial Garden held a new kind of monument. Beside Admiral Dae-hyun's grave, a simple stone marked the place where former enemies had learned to honor each other's fallen. The inscription, written in both human and Veltar languages, read, "Here lies proof that understanding is stronger than conflict, and that those who honor their dead can learn to honor each other." War Chief Kethvor prepared to leave with his fleet, but the parting was very different from what anyone had expected when the day began. "Commander Kim," he said formally, "the Veltar Empire has learned something important today. We will carry word of human honor and strength to all our worlds. You will not be attacked again. And we will remember that the Veltar are warriors, who value honor above conquest." Hyun-woo replied. Perhaps someday our peoples can meet again under better circumstances. Dr. So-young approached Kethvor with a datapad containing detailed information about human funeral traditions and cultural practices. For your intelligence files, she said with a slight smile, so this kind of misunderstanding doesn't happen again. Kethvor accepted the gift solemnly. And this, he said, handing her a similar device, contains information about Veltar customs and traditions. Perhaps understanding can grow from today's tragedy. As the Veltar fleet departed, the humans of New Sol Colony gathered once more in their memorial garden. But this time, they were not just mourning the dead. They were celebrating something new, the knowledge that even enemies could become friends when they took the time to understand each other. Admiral Dae-hyun Park had spent his life building bridges between different species. In death, his funeral had accomplished something he might never have imagined in life. It had shown that the deepest values of different peoples might be more similar than anyone realized. The eternal flame in the memorial garden burned brighter that night, as if it approved of what had been accomplished. And in the months that followed, it would welcome visitors from many worlds, including some from the Veltar Empire, who came to learn about the day when a funeral became the foundation for peace.